anxiety and OCD, there's silver linings to it. People chart the highs and lows of their life or career. The consistent takeaway is that the low points served as jumping off points to success. It's so much less about the work and so much more about the people. I've had the same job in different places and ranged from loving it to hating it based on the culture and the people that I was surrounded with. Compassion comes more naturally than self-compassion. If we treated our friends the way we treat ourselves, our friends would abandon us very quickly. All of this begins with being kind to ourselves.
Welcome to the Differentiation Podcast. My name is Michèle Sorgaroli, and today we have the distinct pleasure of being joined by Jeff Jacobs. Jeff believes that purpose, meaning, and flourishing must be cultivated, and he has with intention, don't want to forget that part, and he has spent a lifetime studying and exploring what it takes in order to create a life that is always evolving. In fact, he's currently writing a book about it called Keep Coming of Age. I love that title. Jeff, before all this, is a seasoned executive and board chair, and he has also spent a decade working with inmates in maximum security prisons. Lots and lots of experience here. He likes to create spaces that challenge people to avoid what they might not want to see, and he strongly believes in the power of music. So in spare time, you might find him serving as an usher in his favorite concert venues. This is going to be a fun conversation, Jeff. So much experience, and I'm so much looking forward to it. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. I've enjoyed your prior podcast, so I'm excited for our conversation today.
It's going to be a treat. Now, I just want to launch right in. You are known as the compassionate agitator. So I'm just going to park on that for a moment. Compassionate agitator. Those are really interesting language. And I want to take us back before all of this started happening. You did your degree as a Bachelor of Science with a major in psychology. Is that right?
That's correct. You've done your homework.
A little bit. I've just done a little bit. And so I want to hear a little bit about what inspired this particular topic of study way back when. Take us to the beginning of that journey and how you ended up in psychology in the first place.
Oh, interesting. Wow. Okay, I wasn't expecting us to start here, but there is a story there.
Nice.
So, I do believe that I believe in a little bit of divine intervention and that God nudges us along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I am a pretty analytical person. So when I was choosing colleges, I had my spreadsheet and all the different, things to determine, what was the right school for me. And one of the schools I was considering was Santa Clara University, a Jesuit university in the Bay Area. And I sat down with my father, and my father, looked at my spreadsheet, and he turned to me and he said, "Well, I have one question for you. Which school is going to give you the best education?" And I thought, well, you know what? Based on my research, I think Santa Clara will.
Mm-hmm.
And now this was based on the assumption that I would do what my father did, and that is choose a nice
Interesting.
business degree and, have that safe, practical education that, would position me well economically. That worked well until I took my first economics class and got a D.
Okay.
Um, I had never gotten a C before, so
Oh,
getting a D in a college course. Now, I was taking psychology classes as electives and really loved
interesting.
them.
Mm.
So this was one of those moments where
Hmm.
I had to really weigh dad's approval versus following that inner voice. And I really felt as though, psychology just felt right for me, and I wasn't exactly sure how I could
Interesting.
articulate it. So that kind of began, a series of challenges between my father and I, which inspired a lot of the work I've done, a lot of my writing and whatnot, and even the career I chose in human resources.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the background on the psychology degree.
That was some early learning.
Yeah.
Really, yeah, how many of us have parents and how many people have been influenced, whether it's a parent or anyone else, have been influenced in their journey and sort of taken a path and gone, oh, this doesn't feel right. And you worded it well. You said, there was the approval and
Mhm.
then there was the inner voice, and those were in conflict.
Mhm.
Were you as aware and able to articulate that then as you are now?
No way. No, no.
So, what gave you the courage to pursue psychology as opposed to continuing on the path that you were originally on?
I think part of it was, if I'm completely honest, I think part of it was a fear of failure, that I
Oh,
wasn't sure I could be successful
mm,
going the business route and taking those classes because it wasn't inspiring to me. It wasn't as meaningful to me. And when I looked at the courses, the direction, even though career was going to be very vague and uncertain for me.
mhm,
At
mhm,
that time, Santa Clara was very focused on, well, a psychology degree means that you will either be a professor or a therapist. And, neither of those things appealed to me. And I ended up getting into human resources
mhm.
by fluke in many regards, but that's where I spent the last 36 years. And one of the things that the Jesuits really believed in is the power of reflection. And that
Mm,
was something that really struck me. And the phrase that comes to mind, or the quote that comes to mind, is any educational experience is lost if not accompanied by reflection. And as I've gotten older and older, that has meant more and more to me, the power of reflection and pausing and sitting with our discomfort and seeing what the lessons are that come along with that. But no, even recently, when I started writing this book, I put together 300 pages of stories and I still didn't know where it was going to lead me. But it
right.
was the writing itself that helped piece some of this together.
The reflection, right?
Yeah,
It's such an, and so this was something that was an idea that was exposed, that you were exposed to very early on, as a 18, 19-year-old, this idea of reflection through the
absolutely.
education facility.
Yeah,
Um, was that part of your upbringing as well, or where did reflection represent itself in your family?
it was definitely not part of my
Mm,
my upbringing.
mm,
M- My father and I had a lot of conflict,
mm, mhm,
and I can understand and empathize where he came from. He was a child of a New York retailer during the Depression.
right.
And when he was 16 years old, he was in the army in Japan. And he loaned his parents money for their first home.
Mm,
So for him, it was all about logic and economics and whatnot. And he didn't really understand weakness.
mhm,
And what I didn't understand at the time, and have it's been a prolonged aspect of my experience, is my own mental health journey.
mhm,
And the fact that I couldn't live the life that he imagined for me. In fact, he was very excited when I got my first job with a company he understood, and that there was a paycheck coming in with benefits. However, he also referred to human resources as the necessary evil of corporate America. So,
That's a bit of I'm excited for you and at the same
well,
time.
and it's funny because
Hmm.
his nudge to go to Santa Clara led me from being a business major to a psychology major to going into human resources instead of
Yeah.
a traditional path. And it also led me from a non-practicing Jewish background to being a practiced Catholic studying Buddhism and such.
Oh,
And his view of spiritual influence or religion was that the purpose of religion was to separate you from your wallet.
wow.
So our
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
misalignment
Mm-hmm.
was a traditional, just a consistent theme. And one of the big mistakes I made was continually trying to balance following my own path and trying to seek his approval, which just created a consistent failure point. Couldn't do both.
Yeah. Isn't that true? when you spoke about this idea of approval and the idea of living someone else's life or living in their image of you, right? Accepting that. You've used several times in this conversation, you've said it differently, but most recently you just said, I couldn't live the life he imagined for me. I
Mhm.
couldn't live that life. And it felt in misalignment. And I find it fascinating. I opened us with this, you're known as the compassionate agitator, and those feel like this was birthed then. It feels to me like
Yeah.
this was birthed then. You were building, I could hear empathy for your dad's situation. And at the same time, you were forging your own path, which is the agitation for his worldview and finding that space for yourself. Can you talk a little bit about that more?
So this whole notion of a compassionate agitator, in some ways, um, my life doesn't make a lot of sense, and I'll explain why.
Uh,
So on one hand, as I got older, I realized, okay, I can be an effective public speaker, trainer. Give me the content, I can deliver the content, I can speak. Part of that was just the panic and the over rehearsal and all that kind of thing. I didn't realize until my late 40s that I also had the ability to do improvisational facilitation, which is why for the last 10 years of my career, I facilitated 500 plus engagements with executive leadership teams. And it was all about pulling content from them and improvising and going wherever the path took. And for whatever reason, that was a strength of mine. And I found that I could create safety at scale, whether it was a small group in person or a large group virtually. And I realized that one of the things that I kept coaching leaders to do is to lead with vulnerability because it gives the people around them permission to do the same.
mm,
So I started leading with vulnerability and modeling that for others. Now, the reason I say there was a conflict that occurred or something that didn't make sense, is that 20 years ago, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder with obsessive compulsive tendencies.
mm,
And in my family, if you have a mental health challenge, you ask, what pill do you take and take care of it? But part of the challenge is, I like to say, I've only lived in my own body, so I don't know what typical is.
right.
So when I was talking to a therapist, I went in for some coping mechanisms, thinking from our employee assistance program, it would be 3 sessions and I'd be done. A year and a half later, she paused and said, have you ever considered medication? And
Mm,
I have kept adjusting and modifying and augmenting, and that combined with other things, there's a music theme that's been,
mhm,
part of my management. It's my faith. It's also, I have found I'm a musician. I play guitar and sing. I have found I can't play and sing and feel anxiety at the same time. I also
mm,
found that I can't facilitate and feel anxiety at the same time. So the irony of all this is most lists of people's greatest fears includes public speaking, and yet me with this anxiety and OCD, there's silver linings to it. And the facilitation actually eases that. And there are strengths associated with the diagnosis. While it's a challenge,
mhm,
it's also enables me to do some things that I couldn't otherwise do. All this is by way of saying I'm not writing a book because I have it all figured out and I'm leading this
mhm,
flourishing life. I'm writing a book because things have been hard for me, and the reflection and the OCD has caused me to reflect and capture things and make connections that I believe are valuable
mhm.
in helping people lead a more purposeful and meaningful life.
I love that. Yeah. You made a couple of really interesting points here. I just want to bring us back to this. You said, just before this, you said, I only live in my own body, so I don't have a sense of what is typical.
Hmm.
Um, and then you talked about misalignment being a consistent theme. And I think anytime this is where looking at someone else's journey and trying to align with someone else's journey, this is what's coming up for me. When we're aligning with someone else's journey, we're not aligning with our own. And that misalignment can be really unsettling.
Oh yeah.
And we're trying to be typical, but the only thing that's typical is what's typical for us. Then you spoke of, when you playing your music, your
Mhm.
guitar, and singing or facilitating, which are I'm reading as places of joy for you, maybe
Mhm.
areas of what we might call your zone of genius or the zone of alignment. There's
Mhm.
something in there, and then you don't experience the anxiety. And it occurred to me that I think, where there's alignment,
Mhm.
we don't experience anxiety when there's alignment with
Yes.
ours, right? What's coming up for you as I'm sharing this? This feels really rich to me.
You know, there's a woman from college. I'll spare the backstory, but I would uh, I would play music on retreats and in church at Santa Clara, which is incredibly ironic, being a non-practicing Jew and doing that. Um, the second time I ever played, so we're going back way, way back. I walked back from the mission church to campus ministry with one of the campus ministers. Her name's Krisha Cox. Krisha, if you're out there, I've been trying to find you and I don't know where
Oh.
you are. Social media hasn't helped me, so I hope you are well. But Krisha said something to me that has stayed with me to this moment. She said, "Thank you for sharing your talents."
Mm. Oh, goosebumps.
And I had never thought of myself as having talents to share. I mean, I don't mean that to be maudlin or, it just for that to come out, it was all of a sudden there was a moment of alignment. There was, okay, I can follow, these nudges to what feels in alignment. So I really think about that. Even when I'm fearful about something. And there have been people throughout my career who have put me in positions to do things that I've never done before. And I found, wow, this feels good. And this may come naturally. Um, or it may just complement the silver linings of some of the challenges that I've experienced as well. And I recognize that talking about challenges as a successful middle-aged white man who's full of privilege
Mm.
is a tough one
Mm.
for me to stomach at different times.
Mm.
So I recognize that I'm just speaking from my experience in hopes that I can reach one person that may benefit, not because I think my message is more challenging or more meaningful than everyone else out there. We all have our
Mm.
stories.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And there's that beautiful compassion and wisdom and empathy coming out in you. Just want to acknowledge that. Being aware, I think, what you said was, I heard in your tone, you said, thank you for sharing your talents
Mhm.
with Krisha Cox. I think you said her name was. When you heard that, you said
Mhm.
it didn't occur to you that you had talents to share. What did that mean to you when you heard that from her?
I think it was affirmation that a risk was well placed.
Oh, nice. Tell us about what do you mean risk there?
As a freshman in college, where I was trying to reinvent myself because I never felt comfortable in my own body. I thought, okay, I'm going to reinvent. I'm going to try new things.
Mm.
And if you're going to a Jesuit university on a Sunday night, your first week in school, where does everybody go on Sunday night? To the student mass at 10 p.m. in the mission. So two or three people invite me to go, and I figure, okay, I'll check this out. And I notice that there's a student-run music group, and I like the music. And I relate to it, so I ask about it, and the first thing I know, they're inviting me into the choir. And they said, well, just try it, and then you don't have to sing with us during the Mass. But then Krisha arrived and just assumed I was a member of the choir, and I ended up singing in the Mass. And then my floor mate and I ended up leading one of the choir groups by the end of the quarter. And then I went on retreats, and then I led retreats, and these skills and these experiences, and I was following my intuition of what felt right, and it felt like a risk because I felt like I didn't belong, um, or I shouldn't belong. In fact,
Mm,
I there was a story about me and a couple of other people as the non-Catholics that were attending the Jesuit university in the yearbook, and
hmm
and um, it wasn't that I didn't feel welcome, is that it was my own self-talk
hmm
that was getting in my way because I was incredibly welcome. And it kept feeding me that not I had talents and it was more authentic and it was the superficiality melted away. I have a real trouble problem with superficiality. And sometimes my authenticity, people aren't, I am willing to share a lot, which means I ask questions that sometimes I overstep. My wife and sons will remind me of that periodically. But anyway, that's what that
Yeah,
meant to me, and how I continued to try to go down that path. Still a lot of pitfalls and a lot of self-talk and a lot of challenges, but that's where the seeds started.
right. I love this. You've said several times, you've referenced the word feeling. It feels right. And you said um, this, it felt right, even when the risk felt like maybe not. And I'm curious about what's that feeling when you know that it's right, even if at the same time, in your language, you said, I shouldn't belong. So there's a logical piece up here that's
Yes.
saying, this isn't right. And yet there's a feeling that says this is right. How do you reconcile that? And how do you even know which one to listen to?
There are milestone moments, I believe, in our lives. And this is part of the reason I've been enamored with this whole notion of coming of age, and why I'm
Mm,
writing a book that's related to that. Um, One of the milestone moments for me was one of the companies I worked for had a leadership fund, and I found out that it could be used for books. So I sent a note out to 10 mentors of mine and said, what books should I be reading that influenced your life? And I got a list of 30 books, which was
oh,
fantastic. And the first book that jumped off the page to me, don't know why, maybe it was just another one of those nudges, was The Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and
oh
Archbishop
yes.
Desmond Tutu.
I've read that book. It's a good one.
And I think it was on page 6
Oh wow.
that Desmond Tutu described the difference between happiness and joy.
Mm,
And he said that happiness is largely predicated on meeting the external expectations of others, where joy comes from within. And in that moment, I mean, I had immense excitement, but I also had immense sadness because I was reflecting on how much of my life I had spent figuring out who am I supposed to be in this moment
mm,
versus who do I want to be. I didn't feel like I had permission to show up for myself um, for a variety of reasons. And but that's the notion. To answer your question,
mhm,
it's that joy. It's that discernment. You can feel it. It's not the satisfaction of a job well done because you get the approval or the kudos of someone else. It's your own inner satisfaction that comes through.
mhm. Very much an internally generated feeling
Yeah.
as opposed to externally stimulated feeling.
You
Is
know,
that what I'm
there's
hearing?
There's another example of this that I really loved. I'm a big fan of the folk singer Harry Chapin, and Harry and his wife Sandy are best known for writing the song "Cats in the Cradle."
Oh yeah.
But Harry has a number of other wonderful songs, and he tragically died early in his life in his 40s. But I was fortunate to be able to get in touch with his estate and get permission to use this story he tells in his book about his grandfather. His grandfather, James Chapin, was a painter, and he illustrated Robert Frost's books of poetry. And he said that there's two kinds of tired. There's the tired where you try to live other people's dreams, other people's goals, and at night when you go to bed, you don't set well. And he called that bad tired. And
Mm,
he described his desire to be a painter and how he loves painting and he wishes he could be more successful. But at the end of every night when he pursued painting, he sat in his bed well and he was good tired because he lived a life on his terms
mhm.
for his purpose and meaning. And I love that story and that illustration. So when people talk about flourishing and purpose and meaning, I just think of good tired. And
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I see that so much as well in my own work around differentiation. We're touching on a number of themes here that apply in
Hmm.
my work as well, because the art of differentiation, if you will, is very much founded in your authentic self, your
Yes.
unique talents, being in alignment with your truth,
Hmm.
bringing that forward in much more courageous ways. Um, and of course, there's all the shoulds and have tos and all the stories that speak to us, whether it's fed from our company, our industry, our
Sure.
family, our experiences, whatever it is. But there's all that that comes in
Yes.
that causes this discomfort, dis-ease,
Hmm.
anxiety,
Hmm.
fear. And there's a certain amount of courage that's required to
Oh,
forge your own path, right?
a huge amount of courage. Absolutely. Absolutely.
When you're working with the people you work with, how do you help people find that courage or tap into it?
You know, I have found some of my first writings were about the prison ministry because I saw so many analogies between the politics and the operation of the prison and how the inmates interacted and corporate life.
Mm,
And in both cases, whether I'm working with executives or inmates or, anyone in between, I believe that there are two things that come to mind. One is modeling vulnerability myself.
mm,
And when I'm authentic, it invites other people to be authentic. I mean, that could start with something as simple as how are you and answering something other than fine.
right.
Or fine, in my view, has been replaced with busy these days. Um, but those are throwaway answers.
Hmm.
So I think part of it is the authenticity and vulnerability, but I
Mm,
think the bigger part of it is inquiry. It's showing interest in another person by asking questions and showing an interest and being curious about them, asking those follow-up questions and being a good listener. And it's trite, but active listening is a huge component of this. One of the best examples of this is Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit, where I worked for 14 years. And I started at Intuit running their college recruiting program. And when you're doing college recruiting, the one of the fun parts of that is the executives love to speak to college students. So I got to interact and travel with different executives, and Scott was a regular speaker at my different events. So I heard him speak regularly. And then I saw the crowd get around him, and everybody wanted his wisdom.
mm,
But Scott would always ask more questions than he would give answers. Someone would ask him a question and then he would turn it back on the person. What's your experience? And he was just so naturally curious that he just brought out the best in people. And he
hmm.
was just a lovely model. And Intuit built a lot of their foundation, their design for delight framework about deep customer empathy is about listening and observing. And to me, that's the best example. So two things, we lead with our authenticity, but we also lead with an interest in other people.
Hmm. And that's so when we're talking about the courage to be authentic and vulnerable and bring that forward, our talents and our gifts. Um, I am curious, what allowed you when you were younger to have the courage to start forging your own path along the psychology route and go against the heavy influence of your father and your family environment?
Hmm. It's an interesting question because I didn't think of myself as courageous back then.
Mm.
Maybe it was the fact that I wasn't living at home. Maybe it was the fact, and my father wanted to make sure that I was secure. For him, it was all about economics. And when I could show him that I was secure financially, then the pressure eased
Ah.
in some regards, and it was replaced with other kinds of pressure about parenting and,
Mhm.
all other types of things. But back then, I think I was still driven by fear, not courage, because I felt an area where I could be successful, and I didn't feel as though I could be successful in a more business traditional path. And that isn't to say that HR is not business. It is it's extremely, I mean, we are
Absolutely.
focused on enabling strategic execution. There's no
Absolutely.
question about it. Um, and so I think gosh, the courage came very late in life, you
Mm.
know, um, and it should have come earlier. And I wish it came earlier because I should have created boundaries earlier on. There's a quote from a Pulitzer Prize uh, reporter. I think his name is Herbert Swope, and he said, I don't know the secret of success or the formula for success, but the formula for failure is trying to please everyone.
I've heard that before too, yeah. Wow.
And I I don't know if it was the anxiety. I don't know if it was the relationship that we had, but I just felt like if I didn't please my father, the earth would swallow me up in some terrible way. And it came at the expense of a lot of other things. So I courage is not a word that I've used to describe myself,
Interesting.
because I've been driven by other things. And, if courage existed, I believe it came too late.
Hmm. That's interesting. I think, I mean, as we're talking here, I'm playing with the concept of courage and fear and that relationship. And I'd be curious to hear, because from where I'm sitting, I think often fear is a stimulus, and fear of what might be coming or fear of staying put will activate action or activate the courage to make a change, if you will.
Sure.
The fear is present, perhaps. And then there are situations where courage is present because something is pulling us forward, or
Mhm.
there's a bigger purpose, bigger meaning, bigger cause. So it feels to me like perhaps courage can be activated through fear, or it can be activated through more purposeful meaning that is pulling us forward, where
Well,
the gain. What do you think?
I think courage also comes from discovering role models. So as I found role models in aspects of my life, that it would have been hard to pave on my own. But then I saw role models who took an interest in me and encouraged me to take one step after another until I was doing things that I never thought I could do, let alone do well and do with little fear or discomfort. But it was because I had role models
Yeah.
incrementally along the way. And I think that's what the compassionate agitation is about, because the compassion piece, and I have to give a shout out to the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford Medical School, because that's where I got my first certification. They have had an 11-month program, and it was a life-changing experience. So the compassion piece is about creating the safe environment where people can actually, speak their truth, but it requires agitation. It requires, me poking people with a stick a little bit and asking tough questions, so that we can really discover new things and pave new ground.
Hmm. What is it about the agitation that allows for that discovery?
Oh, I think I use the word agitation, but it could be inquiry. It's just that perpetual questions. It's not being satisfied with the first answer, but digging further. Not unlike how you're doing in this conversation. It reminds me of, like, for the marketing students out there, the five whys of marketing. Well,
Hmm.
why did you behave this way? Well, because of this. Well, why because of that? And it's not until you get to that fifth why that you start, discovering what's the root of the issue here.
Hmm.
And by asking those follow-up questions, to me, that's the agitation. And it's not agitation in the sense of making someone uncomfortable, because hopefully that's where the compassion comes in. Um, but that's where the agitation comes into play and how it works.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, I love language, and as you probably already know, but I love language. And as I'm thinking about agitation and compassion combined, I think um, the piece around agitation that's really coming up for me is agitation feels like something is when, a jar of salad dressing is agitated, everything's mixed up and sort of not as it would, right? It was settled, right?
Yeah.
And now it's agitated because we're shaking it or doing whatever we're doing. And I feel like this is how you're using the word agitation. It doesn't have an aggression or a violence in it. It's just sort of stirring the pot a little bit and changing the structure of how things have settled so that things can surface and mix up differently. That's the sense I'm getting. Is that how you're using the word
Well, if
itself?
you pour out the salad dressing without agitating it, it won't taste as good as
Right? It's
whether
all
when you
oil.
agitate it. Yeah, exactly. So no,
Exactly.
it's a good analogy. It really is. And I think some of the people who've worked for me and with me have, commented on how I push them out of their comfort zone with the questions that I ask.
Mm-hmm.
And it just forces a reflection that perhaps we wouldn't have accomplished on our own. And again, this is based on my lessons, my failures, my missteps, my embarrassment along the way. And that's what the book is filled with. It's filled with my
Yeah.
stories of, here's the mistake and here's the lesson that came from it. So I can't stress that enough, that and that's what kept me from writing for the longest time, this imposter syndrome of walking into a library or a bookstore saying, what could I possibly add to this myriad of content out there? But then a friend of mine said, nothing. Jeff, you can't add nothing, anything, but what you can do is share things that have been shared before in a way that enables people to hear it from you that they couldn't hear it from others, based on your spin, your stories, etc. And I started worrying less about the trolls and more about the one person that I thought I could benefit.
Krisha Cox is coming up for me right now. Thank you for sharing your talents.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Thank you for sharing your stories. And I think there's a rich piece there where it's not uncommon, certainly in my work and certainly in my own life experience. It feels like, who am I to
Mhm.
share this, right? There's a lot of
Yes.
that, thinking there's so much wisdom out there. There's so much goodness that others are doing, or so much that they're already adding. How can I possibly add to this body of knowledge or whatever it is, right?
Well, I
Uh,
have to also give a shout out to my dear friend Pat Lima, and this goes back to high school. So in high school, I worked in the attendance office. I would take calls from the parents saying, "Oh, my child is sick and can't come in today." And Pat Lima was my boss.
uh,
And Pat was an early person who showed interest in me and my studies and wanted to read my essays. And when I graduated and I left that high school, I still remember where Pat was and how she said, "Jeff, you're going to write a book someday." And every email, every meeting that we've had for the next 40 years, Pat always said, "How's the book coming?" Even when I
oh,
had no intention of writing a book,
planted the
never
seed.
saw it,
That's
you know,
fantastic.
you know, but that she planted that seed
Yeah.
and saw, gave me encouragement, believed in me.
This is amazing. Throughout this conversation, you've spoken of so much influence from others, whether it's mentors, teachers, bosses, people
Yeah.
in your network, educators, what have you. You've given a lot of credence and value to the people in your network. I just want to appreciate that and notice that it's obviously a big part of your journey, seeing how others influence anyone's journey as you are today. Um, I want to just ask a quick question. It's kind of a quick question, but the answer might not be. Just saying. My question is this: what is so important about this work now for you?
Oh gosh. I started writing mm, because it was therapeutic and it
Mm,
was making connections for me. Different things in my life were starting to connect, and I started to gain a greater understanding of myself. You'd think by 59 I'd figured that out, but no. So these things started coming together, and with them came lessons. And I think part of the writing is uh, confessional in some regards. Um, it's a desire to talk about the power of vulnerability and that we're not all perfect, but we can learn from that and we can lean into that discomfort because that discomfort, those low points, that suffering, that's where the lessons come. That's where the learning comes.
Can I
And
interrupt you
while,
there for a
sure,
quick sec? Why is it so important to access those lessons from your perspective?
the low points,
Hmm. The lessons from the low points, like why? Because some people I would imagine are saying, why would I bother? Like, so what's on the other side of that low point or their vulnerability that you are really leaning into that makes this work so meaningful?
it's a good question. Healing, healing and growth.
Mm,
This is a kind of a rudimentary answer, but one of the team building activities that I've used for a long time and have probably facilitated 100 times is something called a journey line. And there are a lot of different versions of it, but essentially what we do is we invite people to chart the highs and lows of their life or career for a certain period of time. And then we discuss it. They share some of those high points and low points with each other, and it can get emotional, and there can be tears and
hmm
whatnot. But the consistent takeaway is that the low points served as jumping off points to success, and that there was greater learning, there was greater trajectory, there was greater self-awareness from the low points than the high points. The other thing that came to mind for me, and this comes from there's a Buddhist nun and author and teacher by the name of Pema Chodron, and I love her work, and I'm going to paraphrase as I won't say this very well. Is she said that when you sit with your suffering and you work through it as opposed to resisting it, not only do you have that learning and growth, but it puts you in community with a broader swath of humanity
mm
because we start to realize that we're connected with people in these ways. We feel isolated, we feel alone. And if we
hmm
resist this suffering, if we resist these experiences, then we continue to live in a way that we have that unresolved challenge. But if we work through it, even just sitting with it, not shooing it away, where is
hmm
it coming up in my body? What does this mean? You ask yourself the whys behind it. What is this connecting with? Because frequently it's not the issue itself, it's the underlining meaning behind it.
hmm
That's the unlock.
hmm
It's like we have this stress in our body and then we go in for a massage and we don't know why we're sobbing,
hmm
but because we hold these things in our body
hmm
as well. So for me, that for someone who was scared of doing those things, that's the big lesson. That's the big unlock for me, and how we can then find our own voice. Because
Yeah.
if we're willing to stand up to the suffering, we're willing to pave our own path. We're willing to then deal with the uncertainty, the adversity, and the resistance that comes with that pursuit of trying to find our
Hmm.
own voice.
Yeah, that's you said a couple of things I just want to summarize because I think there's something so rich here. You talked about unresolved challenges in
Mhm,
our body, in our worldview, in our system. What I wrote down next to that was misalignment,
mhm,
because unresolved challenges create, to my mind, I'm hearing there's misalignment. And what you spoke to is when you don't have alignment or when you are misaligned, you just don't have access to your full self.
mhm,
And from there, you said, by getting aligned and having the courage to align or the vulnerability, particularly supported by community, you mentioned,
mhm.
it helps you find your voice and then you're more willing to pave your own path.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I'll shout out another mentor of
Yeah.
mine, and that's my wife.
Mm,
My wife Irene has consistently led a life that she's been driven from an internal pursuit. She's been very clear on her values and what's important to her. And it's, oftentimes she's led in a way that voice of, well, that doesn't make economic sense,
mhm.
or, things of that nature. But she is pure and clear and has been this role model for me. Um, and it has, been challenging, mostly for her, because, I'm way behind her in terms of my evolution, and just trying to catch up, with that clarity of what's important.
Yeah. Aw. Well, it's this idea of clarity is such a critical one. As in my work, it's all about clarity as well, because I think from clarity there comes alignment, from alignment comes that courage, and your path forward becomes way more joyful,
Mhm.
as opposed to happy moments based on
Yeah.
the expectations of others and serving that. There's the idea around um, misplaced risk is a
Mhm.
word you used earlier, and I just want to come back to that in the context of this because when you have unresolved challenges,
Mhm.
where does your relationship with risk or misplaced risk or appropriately placed risk? Can we talk a little bit about that around unresolved challenges? How do you know whether it's your risk is misplaced or properly placed as opposed
Mm.
to?
Well, the first answer that comes to mind is I had 5 jobs in my first 5 years out of college, and each one felt like a risk.
Um,
Um, there was the argument that, you've got to work through the bad to get to the good, and I've never subscribed to that.
hmm,
If I felt like a culture or a job wasn't the right fit for me, then I just couldn't make that work. And I'm more clear on the couldn't as opposed to wouldn't.
hmm,
And then it's interesting to me. I spent 5 years working in a career center, and managing recruitment programs and coaching students and whatnot. And it's so ludicrous to me that we ask 18, 19, 20, 22-year olds, 40-year olds what they want to be when they grow up. Because what I have found is it's so much less about the work and so much more about the people. And I've had the same job in different places and ranged from loving it to hating it based on the culture and the people that I was surrounded with.
hmm,
So
hmm,
for me, the risk is, you're putting your faith in a culture, in a company, you know, um, in between my 14 years at Intuit and my 7 years at Adobe, I was 3 years with a company called Juniper Networks. And Juniper was not a high performing company. But and in the 3 years I was there, we had three different heads of HR. So that transition meant that the organizational effectiveness group that I was a part of, we kind of led on our own. And three of the leaders of that organization came from the Center for Creative Leadership. So they were thinking differently.
hmm,
And that was a risk to go to an unknown company for me that, their stock wasn't doing crazy things and all that. but I took a risk. In fact, I took a risk in the interview because the interviewer, Chris Ernst, I'll give a shout out to Chris, who's the Chief Learning Officer for Workday and wrote a wonderful book called Boundary Spanning Leadership. I felt so comfortable in my second interview with Chris that I disclosed my mental health challenges. And I thought, he's either, if he hires me, then this is
Hmm.
absolutely a fantastic fit. And if this costs me the job,
Hmm.
then so be it. But Chris and later David Gonzalez, these were individuals that embraced and my skills, my abilities, and gave me opportunities to try new things. Now there was a big risk coming to this company that I wasn't familiar with, but it was one of the best teams that I was ever a part of.
Yeah, interesting. What you spoke to there around misplaced risk, I think it just the coin dropped for me there, where it feels to me like what you're saying is misplaced risk is risk you take that perhaps continues to keep you where you are, block you from your authenticity, stop you from being able to be vulnerable, and not
Sure.
give you access to your full self. Whereas appropriately placed risk is honoring that you have more to learn and how you're going to evolve in alignment with who you are. And that those kind of risks are more appropriate for finding that your own path, that kind of thing. Is that what I'm hearing along those
I, th-
lines?
I think you could very easily replace misplaced risk with misplaced trust.
Mm,
Now, I don't think that trust is necessarily misplaced because I like to lead with trust. I'm
hmm.
one of those that would like to trust you and have you prove you don't, you're not worthy of the trust, as opposed to withhold and have you earn
Hmm.
it. But there could be misplaced trust in which you lead with trust and then it doesn't work out the way you had hoped. And I think we all have examples of that as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
And to me, that's the big risk,
Hmm.
is putting faith in someone and then having it not work out.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. The overarching theme that we've been talking about is this concept of accessing your authentic self and following your path of alignment and finding your voice and whatnot. I'm curious as you think about your compassionate agitation now, today, and we look forward, what are you excited about compassionately agitating in the future?
Well, uh, just last year I left the corporate world, the
Mm,
corporate employment, I should say, and it was because of this calling that I was, I still have those discomforts with, do you ever have enough money
mm,
and giving up the security of a paycheck. And frankly, at Adobe, I had the best job I ever had. I loved working with the executive teams and whatnot. But the fear of giving that up um, was overcome by the fear of not having enough time in this next chapter to try to focus more on not slipping compassion into my business work, but to make compassion and mental health and you know, um, things of that nature a bigger priority. So I am not hanging out a shingle as a consultant that's looking for full-time work, but
mm,
I really enjoy the periodic phone calls that I get for facilitation engagements. That's a lot of
mm.
fun. And I love continuing to do that. I love the speaking engagements that come along. The writing journey is fantastic, and I'm hoping to have the book out early next year. And then I hope to use the book as a platform where I can continue to do more speaking on the topics that I love and enjoy, while still having enough time to be an usher at my favorite music venues. So
Full circle.
that's right. That's right.
And accessing that beautiful, the power of music as a source of
That's
healing and joy too, right? Giving you
that's
access to
right.
your body. Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, Jeff, I feel like we could talk much more. We've touched on so many subjects here and so much depth and nuance in the conversation. As we're winding up and you're reflecting on what we've talked about today, what specifically might you like to highlight that would be really important for your listeners today?
Michelle, we've talked about this implicitly, but I'd like to make it explicit.
Great.
And that is the power of self-compassion. I think,
Mm,
I don't think, I know studies have shown that compassion comes more naturally than self-compassion.
mm,
And if we treated our friends the way we treat ourselves, our friends would abandon us very quickly. We are incredibly hard on ourselves. So for me, all of this begins with being kind to ourselves and not beating ourselves up, but showing ourselves and learning how to show ourselves compassion.
mm,
Um, and a lot of companies talk about compassion, but few unpack what it means.
mm-hmm, mm,
What does compassion mean? That's what I'm trying to do in the book. There's a lot of different definitions of compassion from different sources, and I've created one and operationalized it in a way that's meaningful for me. But I encourage people to do your research if it helps, even do a Google search, pull up ChatGPT if you want, but whatever it is. But don't assume you know what compassion is, but do a little bit of research and then just be kind to yourself. Be kind to
yeah.
yourself is what it amounts to. And then the research will hopefully teach you more on how to do that.
Beautiful. So, as we're seeking learning and going to those places, we're agitating ourselves more compassionately. That's what I'm hearing. I
Yes.
love that. And, sort of unsettle things in compassionate ways that give us access to more. Jeff, so much wisdom and so much to share. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing. For those people who would like to follow along and make sure they know when your book is published, where might they find you?
Yeah, you can reach out to me. Of course, LinkedIn is a great option, although there's a lot of Jeff Jacobs out there. So the best source is probably my website, which is jeffjacobs.org. And
Perfect.
you can reach me if I can be of any assistance to your organizations, your nonprofits, whatever it might be, or if you'd just like to sign up to follow along on the writing journey, then I'd welcome that at jeffjacobs.org.
Love it. Lots of stories to come, I'm sure. Jeff, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us
you, Michelle.
today.
This was a lot of fun.
It's been a delight always. See you soon. Bye for now.
Bye bye.